Okay, everyone. I guess it's a few minutes after 12, so I guess we can start. My name is Tom Ulanowski, and I hope everyone can hear me and see me right now. I am the chairperson of the C45 Quality Association. We're a non-profit organization here in Canada that is comprised of over 130 members that are employed in various quality and regulatory fields in the legal cannabis industry, whether that's in manufacturing or production or growing or testing or consulting. Our mission is quite simple. We advocate for reasonable regulations and public understanding of quality and how that is important in the legal cannabis sector. And what we like to do often is bring both our members and the general public events that are focused around the concept of quality and regulations generally in Canada. But today we have a slightly different presentation, and I'll introduce our presenter, Charlotte, here in a second. But yeah, that's what we do here at the C45 Quality Association. We're always looking for new members and volunteers to help put on events to advocate on behalf of the industry to our regulators, namely Health Canada. We recently had an opportunity to sit down with them, and we'll be having another one shortly. So if you aren't a member, we'd love to encourage you to check out our website, c45association.com. And also that's where you'll find a lot of our events, like our quality time webinars, which will be starting up again, and another presentation by EAS and LabStat in partnership with us. So check us out. The presentation today is focused on ensuring quality systems in cannabis manufacturing. But like I said, it has a focus on the US. And our presenter here today, Charlotte Peyton, she works for EAS Consulting Group as an independent consultant. EAS primarily works with food, pharma, NHP, dietary supplement companies related to FDA regulations. But Charlotte is quite unique in that she has experience and will bring perspective from being an actual business owner in Colorado's early days of legalization. And I'm sure she'll share some fun stories throughout the presentation. So we'll begin here, and just some reminders throughout the presentation. There's a Q&A box. Please make sure that you put your questions in there as they come. We'll get to a Q&A period at the end of this about hour-long presentation. And then we'll kind of it'll start there, and then we'll open up the floor if anyone wants to ask Charlotte any questions directly. So in addition to EAS Group, this presentation is also presented by LabStat. It's a large network of labs throughout Canada, the US, and I believe even Mexico, focused on not only cannabis, but also things like nicotine. And we're actually doing a presentation, which we'll announce shortly, on things like vape studies and studying the aerosols generated by vape cartridges in the cannabis industry. So some exciting events planned for this year. Without further ado, I would like to present to you Charlotte. Charlotte, if you can please take it away and introduce yourself and have a great presentation.
All right. Thank you so much for having me today. So let me share my screen.
Looks
right.
good. Looks
is
great.
that good? All right. So today we're going to discuss kind of general quality systems for manufacturing cannabis products, and as was stated, it'll be like a US perspective with the FDA. Okay. So I've got 30 years FDA regulatory experience, good manufacturing practices, pharmaceuticals and dietary supplements, mostly with some EPA experience thrown in there. I was an owner for a marijuana manufacturing company that was a startup business in Colorado, the first year of recreational, or some people call it adult use, in Colorado. And so that was a very exciting time. I'm an analytical chemist by background. So method development, validation experience, I've run laboratories as management. So I have a lot of different experience in that background. I'm starting at the beginning for anybody who doesn't have a lot of knowledge about all this, so forgive me if I'm talking under what your knowledge base is. So cannabis sativa is the Latin term for the plant. We have decided to put it into different categories based on the amount of THC in it, but there's nothing scientific about that, it's just political. So there's THC, and CBD. There's lots of other cannabinoids besides that, but those are the two of most concern to everybody that's regulating cannabis. THC, analgesic properties, it's that psychoactive effect. There are a lot of other properties, medicinal, useful properties for THC, and until in the US we can get the government to allow researchers full access without being penalized, then we're never going to see any studies on that. So there seems to be a big blockage with that. CBD seems to be the favorite compound. It has all kinds of anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective properties, anticonvulsant. And then the thing that political people love about it is it's not intoxicating and does not have any psychoactive effects. So I have found from being in the marijuana industry, into the hemp industry, and then all the regulations around it, terminology is a big problem. In the US, cannabis that's over 0.3% THC is termed marijuana. The marijuana industry hates that because it's a derogatory slang word from the 30s, and they really like to be known as cannabis. But cannabis is kind of both of it. It is federally illegal. The DEA enforces those rules, but states have legalized it state by state. So each state in the US has its own regulations, its own rules, and its own enforcement. You're okay with the FDA and the DEA as long as you do not cross state lines with it. Cannabis that's under 0.3% THC is called hemp by the industry, and only the plant is federally legal under that 2018 Farm Bill that was passed by Congress. And it's federally legal for that, but only if your state approves it. And again, you're not really supposed to be shipping across state lines. That would involve the federal government. Anytime you read anything from a US federal agency, they always call it cannabis. And that's confusing to a lot of people. So I did a little research, and in Canada, you guys are doing so much better a job than we're doing in the US. You have industrial hemp that's defined only by using certain selected cultivars containing THC at less than 0.3%. We have to actually test every batch that comes out. And then products that come from that would be fiber and the seeds of the plant. And then again, you guys do a better job. Cannabis that's more than 0.3% THC is federally legal and can contain any amount of CBD. So here's just some overview pictures. Typically what you see in the industry, marijuana is high in THC and then low in CBD, and then the reverse is true for hemp. In the marijuana industry, you also have some products that are half and half THC and CBD, but for the most part, that's how they're sold. So as of 2021, only 2 states in the United States don't allow any form of marijuana, and that would be Idaho and Nebraska, both very conservative places. We have 15 states that have legalized recreational marijuana. We have 48 states that have legalized some form of medical use. And then we have 12 states that have only legalized that low THC CBD oil. And it seems like a lot of states will go through that phase. They institute it for just CBD only, and then they sort of move up over time when they get more comfortable with it and collect their own data that, you know, it doesn't cause a crime wave or anything like that. In Canada, all cannabis is legal. all provinces allow marijuana, but with various restrictions locally, such a sensible approach. In Canada, they legalized medical marijuana or legal cannabis in 2013, did recreational in 2018, and industrial hemp was legalized in 1998, but only for specific cultivars. So this is a screen that explains a lot of the craziness in the US. So in December of 2018, the Farm Bill was passed that legalized hemp cultivation under the USDA, which is the Department of Agriculture. But even in the Farm Bill, it recognized that FDA has jurisdiction over finished products, and that is anything you put into the human body. In that same year in June, so 6 months previous to that, GW Pharmaceuticals was granted approval by the FDA for Epidiolex. So now we have a precedent for CBD as a drug. There is a policy for the FDA in the original Congressional Act that says that it's called the FDA Drug Preclusion Policy. And that's if any substance is approved as a drug, it cannot be used in food or as a dietary supplement. So now there's precedents and now there is policy to back that up. So, and within an hour of the Farm Bill being signed, the head of the FDA was right out there putting statements reinforcing that it could not be, there was no avenue for currently for CBD to be legalized into foods or dietary supplements. So that is the official FDA stance. And I don't know of anything short of a congressional act that can change that at this point. So Canada, again, being smarter, avoided all the issues by not allowing any vitamins, minerals, or caffeine in cannabis products. So if, and of course, our regulations for marijuana are state by state, but even if you look at the hemp sales, it's in everything. It's just absolutely in everything. And when you start putting vitamins and minerals or caffeine, some of those types of things into a hemp product, what might have been something that the FDA chose not to deal with currently now becomes their venue, their avenue. They now have regulatory ability to come in and inspect your facility, make sure that if you put vitamins or minerals in there, that they can come and inspect your facility and hold you accountable to 21 CFR 111 for dietary supplements. So you can see where that would be very unexpected for you if you thought that you weren't regulated or they were choosing not to regulate you, and then they show up and, most people wouldn't be prepared. There is a huge pressure from citizens in the US to find a legal pathway for hemp and CBD products, but counteracting that pressure from the public is lobbying groups of pharmaceutical companies. They do not want CBD added and accessible. They want to be able to hold on to that drug category, and that, of course, drives up the price. So the US hemp industry is pretty large and getting bigger all the time. So in 2020, we had sales of $2.6 billion. In 2021, that went up again to $3.5 billion. That is a great incentive for people to jump into the business. Currently, the FDA is doing what they call enforcement discretion. So they are not commenting or participating in anything with cosmetics. So if you put CBD in a topical, then they have no issue with it at this time. I can go to the grocery store down the street, and the local pharmacy in there will have a huge display of all kinds of expensive topical CBD products, but you won't see anything in there that can be consumed. One of the other things that if you are following your state's CBD guidelines for that state, and as long as your products do not cross state lines, the FDA really cannot intervene whatsoever. So, but nobody does that. Everybody's putting it on websites and shipping it across state lines, and they're still not doing that. They're still not interfering with that. Labeling. If you have a label and you say it is full spectrum hemp or that sort of thing, and you don't list CBD out, and you do not make any type of medical claims, then the FDA will leave you alone for the most part at this juncture. They will send you warning letters for any medical claims. And when medical claims, that crosses labels. If you have anything on Facebook or Instagram, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, even testimonials. If you have a customer that said this works great for my, I don't know, psoriasis or something, and makes it clear up, the FDA will say if you allow that to be posted on your website or printed in print, then it's the same thing as if you made the claim. So you have to be careful of that for sure. Since the FDA does not officially allow CBD in food or dietary supplements, and I put this in bold, there are no official FDA regulations for CBD products. So that's where I want to discuss risk and reward. For every business, anytime you have a big decision to make, you have to weigh risk and reward. So people have gotten very comfortable since 2018 and think that since the FDA is not getting involved to the point of shutting down CBD sales, that they are feeling more and more safe every year. Nothing has changed with the FDA stance. They have given no official indication that that is any different than, an hour after the Farm Bill was passed and the head of the FDA explained what their stance was. So again, you look at those numbers though, in 2021, $3.5 billion, there's a lot of reward. So the more time passes, companies get more comfortable with it and decide to take a go at the risk. So Colorado is pretty typical of all the evolution for a lot of states with regulations. Some background for the US, California, it was the first state to legalize medical marijuana, and that was in 1996. In 2000, Colorado decided to also pass medical. And then for both of those states, there were very few regulations, mostly on like plant counts that you could grow at home and that sort of thing. So move up to 2012, we passed Amendment 64. So that was a vote by the people in the state that they wanted it, and some rules for how to administer that. And that was for recreational use. And one of the things for recreational, the difference between recreational and medical in the US, recreational is normally capped at like 10 milligrams of THC per serving. And then medical doesn't really have those type of limits. So it is for medical. If somebody has neuropathy and they need higher doses, then that's allowed. So most of the early regulations were concerned with avoiding problems with the DEA. Most of the regulations were around securities of buildings, where you stored the product, how it was transported. We had lifetime websites that you had to log into with your license number, and every movement of it was recorded, and you asked permission and all of that. It was very much like if anybody's ever worked with DEA product, those DEA paperwork, but this was more difficult and tedious because you would have to log everything real time. So other things that they were concerned with, the regulations, was who was allowed to work with it, who could be allowed to own licenses as an owner in the industry. They put THC limits in products, but then there were no laboratories that were open for business that you could go to, because the laboratories had to be certified by the state, and that took several years. They were very concerned with calculation and the collection of taxes. And then for Colorado, the MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, was almost all completely comprised of police officers, and they didn't know anything about growing. They didn't know anything about manufacturing industries. I know early on, one of our first batches had, we did press tablets, and it was a little bit over, and we thought it was going to be okay. That was the advice we were given by the laboratory. And so we pulled it back when we found out that it wasn't within the specifications by the state. And so we asked our local officer for the MED if we could rework the tablets. And everybody in pharmaceuticals, everybody in dietary supplements knows about reworking tablets, and you grind them down and then repress them at a smaller weight. And they had no idea. And it took me 2 weeks of contacting somebody every single day to be able to get approval to do that. So just on security and trying to keep the DEA away. So early products were not tested for THC or uniformity throughout the product. One of the first things I did as an owner, since I'm a chemist, I bought an HPLC, got it set up and going, and then one of my partners went shopping and went and purchased different types of products from different dispensaries, brought them back to me, and I would run them. And they were just a mess. Some of them would be 10% of what was claimed. Some of them would be 50% of what was claimed. If you did uniformity for like a bar, it would be all 10 grams would be, or milligrams would be in one corner and not in the rest. So there was lots of issues. And some of the early product testing failures for THC, they had nothing else to do but destroy the product. So back to talking like reworking the tablets, they had no path forward for you to use to remediate the THC or whatever type of failure that you had. So since then, there's been lots of additions to the Colorado regulations. Other states, I've worked trying to help people get licenses in other states. Those also have stepped up. There's more, I think, pharmaceutical background people in marijuana, and especially in hemp, than there ever was before. So they have added a lot of things onto that. Testing laboratory certifications now are necessary. And they do different types of qualifications like method validation, and they'll do it for different product types. Heavy metals testing addition has been really great because everybody knows cannabis is very efficient at cleaning heavy metals out of the soil, but then you don't want to take that home and smoke it or make an edible out of that. They now have procedures for remediating failed product, for residual solvents, and then also for micro failures, how to move through that. There's requirements for uniformity throughout products. Not too long ago, they even instituted in Colorado CAPAs, corrective action, preventative action, which is, you know, getting much more sophisticated in what they expect. And I am happy to say now that the MED has employees with pharmaceutical and manufacturing experience. That helps the people who are doing the work greatly. So, you know, marijuana is definitely moving toward GMP type regulations. So all that said, we at EAS try to give advice to people. If you want to go into this arena, even though it's not federally regulated, we always suggest that you at least look at quality systems. Make yourself a quality system. There's more benefit to it than just simply having the regulations. It's like they help you not wasting product. Nobody wants to destroy a batch after it's gone through. If you have recurring problems, like a CAPA situation will help you out, where you go through and document everything, make sure that it doesn't occur again. So we're going to go through now and start looking at some of the good manufacturing practices. So the GMPs are system of procedures, and then the documentation of the proper design, monitoring, and control of manufacturing processes and facilities to ensure the product has the identity, strength, quality, and purity which it is represented to possess. Here are all the different types of products that the CFRs cover, the Code of Federal Regulations. So food, dietary supplements, pharmaceuticals are the big ones that are most known. Cosmetics, then you have, transfusion for blood, animal foods, veterinary sciences, medical devices, and then now tobacco. Here's a list of all the different types of the regulations. You can Google it and find the whole long list of it. Can be interesting, or can be a good way to put you to sleep at night. So the FDA, when they choose to use enforcement, they have two different terms for pretty much every letter that you get from them. Products are adulterated within the meaning of 402G1 of the FD&C Act when products have been prepared, packed, or held under conditions that do not meet CGMP requirements. So you can be doing everything correctly and don't document, part of your manufacturing process. And then the FDA could come back and say, okay, your product's adulterated. Products are misbranded within the meaning of Section 403 of the FD&C Act when the product fails to meet label claims or labeling requirements. So all of the letters that you get, 483s or warning letters, almost always go with adulteration and misbranding. So the C in CGMP just means current. What that really means basically is that the regulations are always evolving. If any new technology comes up that will enable you to keep a better handle on your manufacturing, then the expectations is that you will adopt that. So a quality management system, or a QMS, is a formalized system that documents processes, procedures, and responsibilities for achieving quality policies and objectives. QMS help coordinate and direct an organization's activities to meet customer and regulatory requirements and to improve its effectiveness and efficiency on a continuous basis. So just because you have a quality system today does not mean that you're not expected to improve that as you go along. Any auditor that comes in can always find something wrong. You start with the basic outline and then you always improve upon that. So your QMS will set the company policies. It will define and improve your processes. It facilitates training for your employees. It normally reduces waste, lowers cost, and then engages your personnel. In your quality system, you're going to have quality and management. Management really needs to support quality. If management does not give support to quality, then there's no way that it's going to happen. It's futile. Corporate leadership is essential in establishing and maintaining a company-wide commitment to quality and the adherence to the quality systems. And then management must give quality not only the responsibility, but also the authority to enforce the quality system. I've seen companies where they will have quality report to manufacturing and then manufacturing report to the CEO or the president, and that always fails because their needs are different. So you must promote robust quality systems. They must enforce commitment to quality throughout the entire company. Quality decisions must supersede business needs. So if you have a micro failure on a batch that comes out, you can't sell it. It doesn't matter how much the business needs the sales. So that has to happen. They have to ensure that only acceptable product is released. Then once it is determined that the defective product warrants a market withdrawal or a recall, there can't be any hesitation in removing that product from the market. And of course, you have to have buy-in from the management to do that. So here's a long list of all the different sections of a typical quality system. The ones that I've highlighted in red are the ones that we'll go over. There's lots of minutia in this. Typically, EAS's quality system webinar or in-person talk is 2 days. It's like 16 hours, and we have about an hour. So we're going to skim through this a little bit. We'll go through personnel, your physical plant and grounds, equipment, utensils, specifications and testing, responsibilities of the quality unit, master manufacturing records and batch records, laboratory operations, because everybody uses a laboratory, whether it's in-house or a contract lab. So manufacturing operations, and then product complaints, and the all-important records and record keeping. So records and record keeping, probably the most important thing. You can be doing everything correct, and if you don't document what happened, well, I saw this on a bumper sticker once. If it's not documented, it's just a rumor. And the FDA completely looks at it like that. Some people say that GMP stands for get more paper, get more people. And it always does take more time for you to implement GMP as opposed to not having it. So you must keep written records required for the designated period. Records must be kept as original records, as true copies, such as photocopies, microfilm, microfiche, or as electronic records. So if you do electronic records, you have to utilize 21 CFR Part 11, which is called electronic records, electronic signatures. So that's any software that's the only place that your information or your data goes into. You have to have a password. It has to be changed periodically, even to the point where you're using Excel as a data storage. You can't do that unless you have original records signed and dated to back that up, and then you use Excel for just ease of use, a place to calculate your data. Regulatory agencies must be allowed to access these records. All required records or copies are readily available during retention time period for inspection and copying if requested. So if the FDA shows up at your facility, you really are required to let them go through the records. Some people will fight that. It does no good. So documentation is extremely important. So we have good documentation practices. Records must be generated and maintained so that data can be used for evaluation as well as for investigations. Some of the aspects of good documentation practices is you must document the activity at the time of performance. You can't document it before you get started. You can't write down that you did it. You can't do it, an hour after you finished it. You can't do it tomorrow, next week. If you do write something down tomorrow or next week, you have to write a note that you entered this data in at a later time due to whatever reason, and record that. All your documentation must be permanent, no pencil, no erasable ink, and it has to be legible. And as a manager in a lab, I can tell you that's not always really easy to get people to write well. You have to indicate who performed the activity and when they did that with a signature or initials and date. You just initial and date everything. It gets to the point where you make a mistake writing a check, if you guys are old enough to still be writing checks, and then you will initial and date that just out of habit. So all numerical entries must include units, such as kilograms, and it has to be recorded exactly as seen on the equipment. So if you have a balance and it's reading out 5 places after the decimal, then you must record all 5 of those, and it's somebody else's job later on to round that number. Errors must be crossed out with a single line and corrected with the reason given for the change. Some people will use a code, like 1 is always misspelled, 2 is always miscalculated, and those sort of things to make it go easier. But there has to be a reason. Can't have any write-overs, can't scribble out. So here's some examples on the screen of different ways that you might have written it wrong. Some people will try to write over it, they'll scribble it. For investigation and historical purposes, you just do a single line so that the original entry can be read. Personnel is another important part of a quality system. You have to hire good people, and then you have to continue to develop them. You have to look at people like they are your most important resource. Most of the mistakes that get made are employee errors, either from lack of training or else they just made a mistake. So that's very important. And then employee training is essential to properly perform and control operations. So you have to have qualified employees. You'll see this over and over again in the regulations for the FDA, that you have to have education, training, and experience to perform a job. They want to make sure that you either have the background previously, even for a lower job, and if you don't, that you have enough training that is documented, well documented, and keep all that together in a file. So quality responsibilities must be distinct and separate from other responsibilities. If you have enough staff for it, you cannot have the person be in charge of quality for that project and also doing that project. Sometimes if you have a staff of 3, that gets to be a little bit more difficult, but for the most part, people have to be separate. If you're quality, that's your job and that's all you do. And then supervising operations, you have to make sure that that person's qualified as well. Again, they don't have to be qualified previously. They can be trained after you put them into that job. Dietary supplements require that you have a sanitation supervisor. I don't believe pharmaceuticals have that regulation. But it's a very good idea, one person who's in charge of all the cleaning supplies and schedules to do that. So you have a quality unit, they have lots and lots of responsibilities. They have to create, monitor, implement the quality system. They have to be able to assess the suitability of incoming components, containers, closures, labeling, in-process materials, finished products. They have to evaluate the performance of the manufacturing process to make sure that they've adhered to proper controls, procedures, and specifications. They have to decide if it's acceptable to release any of the batches. They have to review and approve all the procedures and all the associated records. They're in charge of all the investigations, non-conforming products, CAPAs, out of specifications, deviations. They are in charge of auditing and then performing and evaluating trend analysis. And as I like to say, pretty much anything that goes on that's GMP, it is the QA's responsibility. So they're in charge of everything. So for personnel, you have to have documentation of training. It's not enough just to train people. You have to have a folder for every employee. Well, you don't have to have it as a folder. It could be software driven too. But you need to have a job description. That's something that the company has described that will cover everything that's expected of this position. You have to have a training record that documents each individual's requirements as indicated in the job description. And that'll be both on the job training as well as prior education and experience. So for like, if I took a class, this class today, and I wanted to put that in my training record, then I would describe the type of training, the date that you got trained, the person who did the training, the person that was trained, and then the trainer. You need to have either a resume, a CV, that sort of thing, any on-the-job training that is done, and you need to know the difference between read and understood and proficiency training. So for instance, in the laboratory, somebody will give me an SOP on how to run a method, and I might read it and all, but if I didn't have this much experience, I would also perform the method alongside somebody who had a lot of experience, and then make sure that we both got the same answers. That would be proficiency testing. Any courses that you attend and any certifications that you have. One thing that the FDA does demand is that you do annual GMP training. So regardless of your position, every single employee once a year gets a GMP refresher course. So another under the section of personnel, it's like microbial contamination. And you'd think a lot of this would be common sense, but again, it's not, because sometimes businesses decide they don't need their employees gone no matter what. You must take measures to exclude from CGMP operations persons who might be a source of microbial contamination. So if they're ill, if they're sneezing or coughing, if they have an infection, open lesions, skin contact, any other abnormal sources, they are required, the employee is required, and they get trained to know this, to notify their supervisor if there's any type of issue, and then the supervisor addresses it, whether they should go home or find another job that does not concern them being in contact with the product. Personal hygiene, you have to use hygienic practices to protect against contamination of the material or the product. So of course that's soap, hot water, before work, after using the bathroom, and after breaks. Not allowed to store clothing and personal belongings close to the product, to eat food, to chew gum, to drink beverages, or use tobacco products. And again, these are common sense, but they're stated. Personal cleanliness must be maintained in areas where components, products, and contact surfaces are exposed to prevent contamination from microorganisms, filth, perspiration, hair, cosmetics, tobacco, chemicals, or medicines applied to the skin. If you don't have that skin covered, then it's possible to contaminate your product. In areas where components, products, and contact surfaces are exposed, employees must wear appropriate outer garments. That might be lab coats, eye protection, gloves, hair nets, beard covers, shoe covers. Need to make sure that you remove any jewelry or other objects that are unsecured. Lots of batches have been ruined by people having a lab coat on, but having a pin in it, and they lean over and it goes into the product. Another section of the quality systems would be your physical plant and grounds. Physical plant is all or any part of the building or facility used for or in connection with manufacturing, packaging, labeling, or holding the product. That would be internal to the facility, and then external to the facility is also a concern. You have to make sure that everything is appropriate in structure and design, maintained in a clean and sanitary manner to prevent product contamination. So this picture is an example of buildings that manufacturing facilities that do not meet standards. So when you have that type of growth of weeds around your entrance to your building, then rodents, insects, all kinds of things could come up the stairs, go in through the door. So if you keep all of that clear, then that's less of an invitation to rodents. So this is actually an FDA inspector who had a picture taken there, and he can't show his face. That's why his back's turned. So you want to make sure your equipment is stored properly, that the weeds and the grass are cut in the immediate vicinity of the plant, that you keep litter and waste removed, that you keep your parking lots, your roads and yards maintained, that you have adequate drainage. We find that more often than you would expect, that there would be standing water somewhere. Of course, that can breed mosquitoes and other insects. and that you have adequate systems for waste treatment and disposal. So your physical plant must be suitable in size, construction, and design to facilitate maintenance, cleaning, and sanitization. All areas of the warehouse, including wall perimeters and corners, must be kept up, orderly, free of debris. The blowers, vents, and grids must be kept free of grease and dirt buildup. The plant must provide adequate, appropriate temperature, humidity, and light conditions for storage and use of the materials and products. And that's a really good hint too. When I do an audit and I go in, if everything is clean and tidy, usually their paperwork is too. So people usually either care about everything or don't really care about a lot of it. So to prevent components, products, or contact surfaces from being contaminated, the physical plant must be clean, and that's removing dirt, litter by washing, mopping, sweeping. It must be sanitary. You have to make sure there's no microorganisms of public health concern. And then adequately repaired. You don't need holes or cracks in the walls, floors, ceilings, doors, or windows. Another thing that I see when I go into places, if the facility is not pretty new, there'll be like ceiling tiles falling down and that sort of thing. And where you think that wouldn't be a concern, it could fall into the product during the manufacturing process. It's important to clean all the work areas. Cleaning is not just for floors. You wipe down tables, empty trash cans, clean under the tables. You have to keep the restrooms clean, break room. Don't leave mops sitting on the floor. And you'll notice to the right, there is a form there. So again, documentation is extremely important. You can clean that restroom every single day. If it's not documented somewhere that somebody did that every single day, then as far as the FDA is concerned, you didn't do it at all. So those are really good habits to keep, and it addresses every aspect of the manufacturing process. So you have to have adequate space for orderly placement of equipment and holding materials to prevent contamination and mix-up of materials. You have to have separate or defined areas provided for different types of materials. You have to separate or define the areas provided for materials and products of different status. So when you have something incoming material, you would place that into a quarantine area or mark it in some way that it's quarantined. After it has been accepted through testing, quality you change it, either move it physically to an area where it's accepted, or else you change the tags on it that says quarantine to accepted. Or if it's rejected, you also mark that. A lot of people like to use the yellow and red and green like a stoplight. So you have a nice visual for that product status or that material, that incoming raw material. And that's pretty useful. Pest control is another section of a quality system that it's good to pay attention to. This picture, a colleague of mine took this picture. That's actually tape around the bottom of his pants. And somebody asked him why he had his pants taped up like that. And he said it was to keep the rats from running up his pants as he did his job. So obviously the management has not taken that seriously and addressed those problems. So pest is any objectionable insect or other animal, including birds, rodents, flies, mites, larvae. Rodents spread diseases, we know that. And they do that through direct contact with the rodent or feces, urine, saliva, or through rodent bites. Being bitten by ticks, mites, fleas that have been feeding on sick rodents can also spread disease. So you must take effective measures to exclude pests from plants and protect against contamination. So you don't ever allow animals or pests into the plant. If you have a guard or a guide dog, it can be allowed into some of the areas, but it can't contaminate the materials or the contact surfaces. You keep the doors closed all the times unless it's in active use. control traps, interior and exterior, and lights, bug lights, that's used by doors a lot. Use pesticides as per instructions and government regulations. And it is always the best idea to hire a professional pest control company and then make sure that they keep adequate records. Allergens are another source of concern. If you handle allergens, then you must check for them. The 8 known food allergens is milk, eggs, fish, crustaceans, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and in the US, we just added sesame. So allergens are important that you keep them away from other products, and if you have them at all in your facility. Allergen program must be developed and implemented to prevent cross-contamination of allergens. You need to separate or define areas that are provided for different types of allergens, store them on the bottom racks to prevent spillage onto items below, and then identify them as an allergen type at all times. Equipment and utensils is another section that's important in these quality systems. You must use equipment and utensils that are of appropriate design, construction, and workmanship to enable them to be suitable for their intended use and to be adequately cleaned and properly maintained. The equipment and utensils must be installed and maintained to facilitate cleaning of the equipment, utensils, and all adjacent spaces. They have to be corrosion resistant, made of non-toxic materials, and be able to withstand the environment in which it's used, namely temperature and humidity, and then the types of cleaning compounds and sanitizers. You don't want to use wooden tables. Stainless steel would be more appropriate, easier to clean. They don't get contaminated, that sort of thing. When you have equipment that makes measurements, you have to do calibrations. Instruments and controls used in manufacturing or testing must be calibrated before you first use it, and then at a frequency specified by writing them by the manufacturer of the instrument or control, or at routine intervals, or as necessary to ensure the accuracy and precision of the instrument or control. When you have something that can't be used, then you would repair or replace the instrument and then use a sticker. We have an example of a couple of stickers down here. The green one that's calibration would say the date that it was last calibrated, when that calibration expires, who performed it. And then if you try to calibrate that instrument and it doesn't calibrate, then you would put a sticker on there that says out of calibration and make sure nobody uses it. Maintenance for your equipment is very important. Your equipment must be maintained to protect components and products from being contaminated by any source. Equipment and utensils taken apart as necessary for thorough maintenance, cleaning, and sanitization. Single service articles must be appropriately stored, dispensed, and disposed. Store cleaned and sanitized portable equipment and utensils in a manner that protects them from contamination. So, you don't clean something and then leave it out where it can get contaminated. A very, very important part of quality system is having master manufacturing records and batch records. Of everything, warning letters, 483s that the FDA sends out, the top category is testing and specifications. And then right after that, it's master manufacturing records and batch records. And that's been that way for, oh gosh, like the last 15 years, I believe. So your master manufacturing record should be prepared and followed for each formulation the company manufactures and for each batch size that it manufactures to ensure uniformity in the finished batch to batch to batch. Now, so if I have a hemp CBD gummy And I have 5 different flavors, but I make them, manufacture them in 2 different batch sizes. So maybe one is a lot of 50,000 and then the other one is a lot of 100,000. Then I'm going to need 10 different master manufacturing records, which is basically a description of how to make it. So for every formulation that you make, any change to the flavor or extra ingredient in there, and then also for each batch size. The purpose of an MMR is to provide detailed instructions for each point, step, or stage of the manufacturing and packaging process to consistently make a product and achieve quality standards for identity, purity, strength, composition, and a lack of contaminants. You want to identify specifications for each of those steps, points, or stages of the manufacturing process where control is necessary to ensure the quality of the finished product. And then you need to establish controls and procedures to ensure that each batch that is manufactured meets the specifications. So what goes into an MMR? You have to have the name of the product, the strength, the concentration, the weight or the measure of each ingredient for each batch size. You have to have a complete list of all the components that you're going to use. You have to have an accurate statement of the weight or the measure of each component to be used, a statement of any intentional ingredient overage amount. And I'm not certain about the Canadian regulations. For dietary ingredients, vitamins are notorious for falling off over time. I believe that cannabinoids do that as well, but I'm not intimately involved with that. If you do put overage in there to be able to meet the end of your stability time, then you would need to state in there how much overage you would put and why. You need to have a statement of theoretical yield that you expect at each step of the process, where control is needed to ensure quality, and expected yield when the manufacturing is finished, including the maximum and minimum percentages of theoretical yield beyond which a deviation investigation and quality investigation is conducted. And then you make a disposition decision. So you expect a yield at a certain amount. If it's under or over that, you have to do an investigation. You also have to have a description of any packaging and then a representative label or else a cross-reference to where you would keep a representative label that's for your final product. That way there's no interpretation possible by anybody in manufacturing. They know exactly what steps to do, exactly how much to weigh out, exactly what that's going to be. Here's the correct label for it. So specifications for each point, step, and stage in the manufacturing process where control is necessary to ensure the quality of the product and that the product is packaged and labeled as specified in the MMR. You want to have procedures for sampling and cross-reference to procedures for test or examinations. You want to have specific actions necessary to perform and verify points, steps, stages in the manufacturing process, where control is necessary to ensure the quality of the product and that the product is packaged and labeled as specified in the MMR. 2 points that auditors will look for every time. If you have somebody weighing or measuring, you have to have another person just watching to verify that they pulled the right thing and that they weighed the right amount. So there's no question of it. And then likewise, you want to have one person adding the component and another person verifying the addition. So weighing and measuring, 2 people, and then adding to the manufacturing process, 2 people. So batch production records, BPRs. Companies should prepare a batch production record every time a batch or a lot is manufactured and packaged. The BPR should accurately follow the corresponding MMR and include complete information relating to the production and control of each batch. Documentation must be done at the time of performance, the same as with any other documentation, of the manufacturer of the batch, including the date on which each step is performed and the initials of each person with each step. A quick overview of the difference between a master manufacturing record and the batch record. Most people will make that master manufacturing record. That is the original. It's signed as such. And then somebody will make an exact copy, like a Xerox, of that MMR and use that as the batch record. So one is like the original instructions, and the two is the instructions with what actually happened for that batch. That gets a little confusing for some people. So BPR contents, the batch, the lot, and a control number that the company assigns to the finished product. You have to have the identity of equipment and processing lines that you use in the production of the batch, the date, time of maintenance, of any maintenance, cleaning, sanitizing of the equipment, and the processing lines used in the production of the batch, or a cross-reference to where the records are, such as an individual equipment log where this information is retained. The unique identifier that you assign to each component, packaging, and label used, and it has to have the identity and the weight or measure of each component used. So you have to put your actual yield on there. So on the MMR, you'll remember you had a theoretical yield. And so for the BPR, you will calculate and enter your actual yield. And then a statement of the percentage of the theoretical yield. And then you want to have a window that's allowable yield range, so you'll know if you're outside of it. Actual results obtained during any of the monitoring operations. Results of any testing or examination performed during the production or cross-reference to the results. Documentation that the finished product meets established specifications. The quality unit must review and approve all completed BPRs. And this is an essential part of the checks and balances aspect of GMPs. So it's good to have all of that content. Some of those things are extra documents, such as specifications, that sort of thing. And it is easier, simpler, more accurate to have all those documents gathered together rather than to have to go look for those documents somewhere else. And then quality would go through that. Only quality releases a batch. So now the other thing that we find the most citations from the FDA is specifications and testing. So specifications must be established to ensure the quality of the product in terms of identity, purity, strength, composition, and limits of potential contaminants. You're going to have specifications for raw materials, for packaging components, for in-process materials, and then again for finished products. Specifications include physical, chemical, microbiological testing that must be performed to ensure that all of those specifications have been met. Identity, so test or test chosen to determine the identity of a raw material, in-process material, or finished product must be unequivocally delineate from any other material. You can have a single test or a combination of different tests that may be required to make an identification. So for identity for hemp, you might run a HPLC analysis and identify that the CBD is there. Because it's botanical, you might do other types of testing on there. Identity sometimes is a organoleptic. You might say that it's a green dried plant material. There could be a description of that. Sometimes when you don't have a very specific test, they'll do what you call orthogonal testing, which means you will bundle a set of non-specific tests that would indicate that this is the identity of the product. Purity, which just means microbiological purity. Purity testing as defined by the World Health Organization, could be chemical purity or foreign matter. The strength of it, that would, for hemp, of course, would be CBD. You would have a definitive procedure to prove the existence of an analyte, a chemical constituent, or a certain concentration. So you would do HPLC for a CBD chemical to find that in there. And then AA and ICP would be for minerals, but that's just a couple of examples. Your composition verifies the combination of parts or elements within the material or ingredients that are blended with carriers, chemically bound to form a salt, or present at a particular extraction ratio. And those are almost always physical tests. And then contaminants, very important. There's different types of contaminants that you might do to comply with local, state, federal, or international regulatory limits. Such examples are gross physical contaminants. You might find metal fragments. If you have, if you're using screening at any step in your process, you might want to put a metal detector at the end to check for that. Heavy metal contamination, we discussed that earlier. Cannabis is an excellent remover of heavy metals. Pesticide screens, residual solvents. If you use a residual solvent in any of the processes, then you would need to test for that residue at the end. If you have allergens, any other types of toxins or contaminants. So test methods. All tests and examinations that are indicated on the specification must be clearly defined and validated. Validating a test method is not a small thing. The laboratory and actual unique test method document number must be provided on the specification. So you can't say just, we're going to do CBD analysis by HPLC. You have to have a written method with a document number, and it has to be included on the specification. Again, so it's very specific and people understand exactly what happened. A scientific valid test method is one that is documented to be specific, accurate, precise, and consistently do what is intended to do, which is ruggedness. This must be verified experimentally in the material and/or product matrix, either by the company itself or published in scientifically reviewed journals or text. So we'll go into laboratory operations a little bit. The laboratory provides physical, chemical, microbiological testing of materials and products to ensure the quality of the material, product, or control processes. Other things that the laboratory might do for you could be method development, might be method validation. They might perform stability for you and do sample storage. You can use your own in-house laboratory to perform some work, and you can use a contract laboratory. I know when you get into cannabis, sometimes that's specified for you, whether it is, usually it's a state certified situation. So laboratories have to have and follow written procedures for everything that they do, all the tests and examinations. They have to use adequate laboratory facilities. If you go to a laboratory, it's being run out of a shed out back, then don't use them. They have to have control processes that have to be reviewed and approved by their quality unit. They have to identify and use the appropriate scientifically valid test methods, and they must document the testing and all the examinations at the time of performance and include all the test results. So sometimes you have non-conforming product. The next set of slides are around investigations, and not everything goes as planned. So if something doesn't go as planned, then you have to have a documented investigation to determine what happened, and then if it's okay to go forward from there. So non-conforming product investigations investigates the impact of the quality incident on their particular batch and related batches. It allows the quality unit to make a disposition decision on the materials or the product. So again, this is an essential part of the checks and balances aspects. So non-conforming products may occur when a specification is not met. So that would be an out of specification investigation. If you have a deviation from the master manufacturing record, then you want to investigate what was different if it impacts the product. If there is an unanticipated occurrence during manufacturing or an in-process control system, it could be an instrumentation calibration problem that may have adversely impacted a batch. So you're running your HPLC and all of a sudden you notice that it's out of your calibration window. So that would have to be investigated. If somebody returns a product, then you do a returns investigation. If a product complaint has been received from the customer, then you would do a product complaint investigation. So out of spec investigations of a test that falls outside of the acceptance criteria indicated on that specification. The purpose of the OOS investigation is to determine if the result is valid and that the result is truly OOS. We could discuss out of spec investigations for like an hour at least. They get to be pretty complicated, but you're just trying to make sure if that's a real answer or if it's not a real answer, and then go from there. Deviation investigations. Again, if something happened, then you need to investigate if it's a deviation, if they didn't do what the instructions entailed. And you can have planned or unplanned deviations. An unplanned deviation is a whoopsie. Somebody didn't follow your batch record instructions. Sometimes you can be out of something and you can't find it anywhere, and you will just plan to substitute something, but you would write up that planned deviation before you manufactured. Quality investigations. If an unexpected occurrence or event that may have impacted the quality of the material. So again, you could have had equipment calibration issues, misidentified damaged materials, or other kind of deviation returns or complaint situations. Returned product investigation is conducted to evaluate the reason for the return, examine the returned product, and assess whether the quality of the product or any related batches have or may be impacted. And then again, you can have product complaint investigations that are conducted for product complaints involve a possible failure to meet specifications, or that if it has or resulted in illness and injury. When you do a product complaint, you have to do investigations that might spread out to other batches and records. The appropriate follow-up actions must be undertaken based upon the investigation findings. So that is it. I think we're, what, an hour and 15?
Yeah, not even. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
My pleasure.
That was very, very enlightening. For those of us in Canada, of course, we abide by a lot of these under the good production practices umbrella. So, of course, that's slightly different than GMPs and also slightly different than other international things like EU GMPs, which are their own kind of accreditation. But I personally find this stuff quite fascinating, and I think many people do on both sides of the border. You know, here in Canada, we are quite fortunate. As a Canadian, I'm happy to live in Canada for a number of reasons, but specifically related to this, we are the first, big developed country to really launch a medical and also adult use commercial system on a federal level. And I would hope that we have a little bit of an advantage when you look at other countries, because we've been able to bring the level up across the board so that we can ship across provincial and territorial lines, that we can service a number of different, obviously, sales channels. Obviously, our regulations need a lot of work and improvement, but I got to say, it's a good feeling as someone who works as a quality assurance person for a licensed producer in Canada and has for 7 years to see what it takes to bring a product to market in a legal framework. And, whenever I see what's going on in the States, whether that's, webinar to speaking to people, I'm always kind of taken aback by this like huge patchwork of laws and regulations. As you said, most states have some sort of medical cannabis access regime, but how does that compare on a state level? And I'll just I have a few questions, then we'll open up to the rest. But how does that compare? Like when you go to Colorado or you go to California or Washington, what kind of regulations specifically related to sanitation, hygiene, quality, inventory control, composition, packaging, like do these state regulators have that much pull, that much say, or are these regulations very, very high level, or is it kind of all over the place? And maybe if you can give specific examples of states, if possible.
So yeah, in a state, they're pretty much God. They tell you exactly what to do and what you can't do. Thank goodness over the years, the quality of the regulations have improved to the point where there's a lot of commonality from state to state. There may be a few little things here and there. But like California, for instance, they tapped into the expertise and the resources that they already had. So they had cultivation, go to the Department of Agriculture. Oh, how smart, right? And then, and using all these agencies they already had, so they already had experience. Again, I go back to Colorado, we just had a bunch of police officers that got reassigned. And so that was very difficult. Canada has done an outstanding job of being sensible and reasonable. And it's almost like the US is trying to prevent it instead of regulate it. I mean, that's the impression one gets. I'll probably be in trouble for saying that.
And of course, there are a lot of politics because there's a lot of, the states have a lot of power and a lot of independence. But, we know that food, pharma, drugs, natural health products do have a federal, requirements. It's just funny, like, I've seen pictures and heard of people going to like a drying room at a cannabis cultivator in Oregon, and it's like built out of plywood and 2x4s. No one's wearing PPE. There's dogs running around. No inventory control. Hey, do you want a vape to take home? That kind of stuff. So, I'm often taken aback about how some of these regulations currently exist. And then, of course, I look at where cannabis is going in the future globally. It is going to be regulated, maybe not to the same extent as in Canada. We love our regulations here, whether they're for milk or eggs or cannabis. But ultimately, it will be some sort of CPG type product, and as a result, there's going to be some minimum standard, especially for international trade. So my question for you is, again, there's a wide kind of patchwork, but like how, based on what you know, and I asked you before when we were chatting, take out your crystal ball and to the best of your ability, how do you think that the FDA or the US, the federal government, will approach cannabis, adult use cannabis specifically, in the next few years to come? Do you think that they'll honestly take a step back and allow the states to keep doing and having intrastate trade? Or do you think that at some point, if the laws and the politics allow, they will step in and hold producers and manufacturers to such high standards?
So the FDA has given every indication that they do not wish for hemp to be in food and dietary supplement. I know of two companies that have made the effort of working with the FDA, some of the junior members of it, and apply for an NDI, and was denied at the end. And so even if everybody does exactly what they want, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think their intention is to keep it in the pharmaceutical realm. We will see. But like I said, there's a lot of push for Congress to pass something that would force them to do that. Because in the end, Congress is in charge and the FDA just obeys what Congress tells them to do. one thing, and I've heard it suggested once, and I've really latched onto it. I think as far as marijuana is concerned, I don't think that will ever change from being illegal federally unless they choose to go the alcohol route. To me, if you stuck that with the ATF and presented it that way, just like alcohol in the US, it's federally legal, but every jurisdiction gets to decide whether or not they want to participate or not. It's taxed locally, federally. A lot of recreational marijuana that's happened in the US has happened because of the tax revenue that it produces, right? That's one of the things that helps pass it. Not that politics, really are proponents of it, but that the revenue stream. So if they were to put it in that alcohol under ATF, then it would no longer be regulated by the FDA. So, I mean, to me, that would solve a lot of problems, but you don't hear a lot of chatter about that.
For sure. And from your perspective as now as an independent consultant or consulting for various types of companies, including ones that are interested in cannabis, are you now seeing maybe larger, more sophisticated companies, even though there's technically no need to abide by GMPs as they pertain to the US? Are you seeing them try to build and operate to that standard, or are a lot of companies just kind of going, well, what's the point? They look at Canada and arguably our regulations are pretty similar to what you outlined, and I would say quite strict. And as a result, it costs a lot of money to operate a cannabis business. You need a lot of people, you need a lot of expertise, a lot of paperwork, qualified people to do that paperwork. So I'm sure many people look at the Canada from the US and go, what's going on over there? Like, no one's making money, or very few people are making money, and it's been a few years now. Are you seeing people come up to that standard, or are you seeing the general stance as well? It's great right now, and no one's knocking on our door, and let's leave it that way.
And people will do that until they're forced to do that, right? Nobody wants to invest into quality unless they're made to do it. So either the state makes you do it, or the feds make you do it, or else your customers make you do it. What I am seeing is that there is such a demand for certifications for some of these, because not everybody is where they call it horizontally integrated, where they grow all the way to selling the product. That's not happening so much anymore. It's a lot of people, these are growers, and here's extractors, and here's manufacturers, and here's the retailers. And everybody in that chain wants the person before them to be certified. And so there's a lot of certification going on, which causes them to increase their quality systems.
So the invisible hand of the free market is somewhat kind of driving that, right? Which is great, but ultimately it relies on the free market, and it's usually driven by cost, right? So I'll turn it over now. Thanks, Charlotte. That was fantastic. And just so everyone knows, we are recording this and we're posting this webinar. So if your colleagues or you haven't seen it or you want to share it, that a link will be sent out. So if I can ask, I have there's a few questions in the QA that we can start with in the Q&A box. I don't know if you can see them, and I'll kind of point you to the ones we'll kind of go in order. But also, I see a hand up. If anyone else wants to raise their hand virtually on the participant panel, we'll get to you after. We can unmute your mic, so get ready to speak, and we can have a quick chat, and let's have about 15 minutes left over for questions. So the first one comes from Dennis Moisenko. Dennis says, recent Colorado regulation updates require testing of heavy metals in cannabis vapor, not just the product or the concentrate. Could you speculate if this regulation will be picked up by other states or perhaps Health Canada? And anything about that?
Yeah, no idea about Health Canada, but yeah, heavy metal is definitely something that you can find. And in fact, for example, in Pueblo, which grows a huge amount of cannabis, there is a steel mill with all these acres around it that are, so that, I mean, to me, that's dangerous as far as like you would want there to be heavy metal testing done on that. So yeah, regulations usually always increase. They usually never decrease. So I would expect that heavy metals would get picked up by other states.
And I guess Dennis is probably asking about the physical hardware itself. The heating elements of a vape cart itself that can introduce additional
Oh,
heavy metals, right? Which
for vaping, yeah, they're doing that for tobacco as well.
for
So
tobacco.
vaping in general, yeah, it's like it depends on the contents of the device.
Right, right. Would you say Colorado generally has led because of their history and early kind of adoption of the cannabis industry legally? Do you think they should be still considered kind of leaders in a state kind of level as far as the quality and regulation side of things, or are there other states that our viewers can kind of look into to look at what the best practices are maybe in the future?
Um, I'm not familiar with every state, but a few. Colorado, I think, got left behind rather quickly. They were sort of dragging their feet on increasing their regulations early on. And so they've started to catch up now. California, like I said, does a really good job, I think, of regulations, but that's their history, right? Regulate everything and consumer safety. So
Yeah. Okay. And I guess another question from Dennis here. He asks fundamentally about import and export or international trade. So, Charlotte, could you provide an overview of cannabis, hemp, or CBD product export processes from the U.S.? So, like, will the DEA give a company an export license for hemp, CBD, or cannabis? And just so for some additional context, in Canada, we could export and import. It's limited because of UN international, conventions that is limited for medical or scientific purposes. And there have been imports from and exports into European countries and I think even from the U.S. or from Canada to U.S. for kind of scientific purposes. But have you ever seen or heard of anyone exporting from the U.S. legally, whether that's hemp or CBD?
um, I have. I am not an expert on import export. That's like a whole nother expertise. But I do know of people that are doing it. And I think from what I've heard, it's got to do more with sort of like a labeling issue, like how you present it as to whether or not that you do that, whether you can do that.
Okay. I'll thank you. I'll turn it over to Jesse, who's had his, I believe his or her hand up. Jesse, I'll unmute you here and feel free to ask Charlotte a question, okay? And Jesse, you're available to chat now. If you just unmute your microphone, we can't hear you. And if you need some time, that's okay. I'll go to the next question, and then you can just unmute yourself when there's a break here. So Ramesh in the Q&A box asks, I wish to know which regulatory authority will take action for cannabis products to move towards CGMP regulations. So you've already touched on this, but basically the two pathways, if it were to be federally legal, other than maybe a whole new department coming up, you would look at the Food and Drug Administration as one option, or the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division. Those are really the two regulatory agencies that may in the future regulate federal marijuana or cannabis laws in the U.S.
Yeah, I really don't think that the US will go the route of Canada and make a separate agency to handle just that, even though they do have big enough sales to make that happen. It just is not in their nature. I've likened it to the FDA has like little cubicles and everything has to fit in that cubicle. And if it doesn't, then it just doesn't seem to go anywhere. So yeah, I mean, like I said, the ATF thing was my idea after hearing somebody else talk about it, but I haven't heard any buzz of that being even proposed federally.
And thank you, Charlotte. Jesse, your hand is down now. Do you want to ask a question, Jesse? If not, I'll just disable your mic there. No worries. I'll remind anyone else if you have a question, just raise your hand virtually. I should be on the bottom of your screen to raise your hand and you can ask away. Okay, I'll move on to Tamara Follett here. Tamara, I know just from the industry, is a micro license holder, one of the first, I believe. She asked a question. She also has a background in kind of pharma regulation compliance and GMP before she moved to Canada. And so again, in Health Canada's eyes, we are GPP, not GMP. And fundamentally very similar for the most part. Question one from Tamara. Have you found any other differences between Canadian regulatory controls and GMPs, if you've ever had the opportunity to really delve into the Canadian regs?
I spent one whole day digging into the Canadian regs, and you got to find everything first and then go through and read it and interpret it. I was really surprised at how similar they were. So I'm definitely not an expert in Canadian GPPs at all, but everything that I saw looked very, very similar. Same intent, maybe a little different delivery, but same intent.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's probably some nuances there. For example, Tamara, in another comment here says, the difference is the two-man or two-person rule for weighing and mixing. There's nothing specific about that in the regulations. In Canada, the regulations are very vague and high level, and it's up to the operator or license holder and the QA department to kind of prove that they're following current good production practices. But is that two-person weighing and mixing rule a standard in the GMP regulations, or is that kind of a good to have?
Yeah, no, that's very standard. That's something that they will judge you on, and it's to keep catastrophic mistakes from happening early on in the process, right? And it is, and you think about it as a business, that's a good thing for you to do. It's like, because you can, lose everything, lose your entire batch from somebody grabbing the wrong thing or weighing the wrong thing in there. So, I mean, it's one of the more practical things. It seems like it's silly because you have two people, you're paying somebody to stand and watch, but it's for a very short time. And then your benefit is huge.
Yeah. And then Tamara asks another question here. And I guess, just so people understand, in Canada, we have a medical system, which is, so we produce cannabis and cannabis products under one regulatory regime, right? The cannabis regulation. So whether it goes into a medical sales channel or an adult use sales channel, everything up to that point, including labeling and packaging, is fundamentally the same. There's after nuances on possession limits and how much you can kind of order and buy, but generally speaking, they're the same. So when we talk about medical in Canada, it's not an approved drug through Health Canada, or it doesn't have a DIN number. And some companies are working towards that, and just like the Epidiolex kind of thing. But in the States, it doesn't seem to me that they would have a similar system. There's a state level medical system, but on a federal level, I don't see the FDA saying, submit DINs, other than for companies like GW that are submitted Epidiolex, which are actually causing issues and precedents for the CBD industry, because now they're technically drugs, right? So do you see any advantage, or do you see the FDA moving towards having a pseudo medical, but not really a DIN type or an approved medicine or pharmaceutical system for cannabis? Do you see that happening, or?
I mean, okay, so when you say we're talking about the medical grade, you are referring to hemp and CBD, right? And not marijuana? Because marijuana would be just federally illegal, and it's only in a state, and it has to be those rules, right? So with the hemp, it also, you can move it across state lines, the plant material. So I don't know, it might be possible to sell and be able to move it from Canada in. I don't know of anybody that's doing that. We have a flooded market for hemp growth. A lot of the farmers said, oh my God, that's a valuable crop to grow. It's worth so much money. Yeah. And everybody went right out and started doing it. They had no idea of the rules around growing it. And I mean, like how to make it live, how to make it flourish, how to harvest it. And so a lot of farmers got burned on that. So we have a flooded market. I don't see where it would probably be financially beneficial to try to sell down here.
Well, especially because people are selling CBD in gas stations and grocery stores and farmers markets and what have you. And you know, when it comes down to it, when you can't make claims or medical claims, and when the consumer is generally after the lowest cost item, there would be very little incentive for a company to try to take a CBD type flower to like an FDA medical standard, pharma standard, and you know, I just don't see that happening as well. So you know, it's kind of interesting the politics at play here. A few more questions here, Charlotte.
Okay.
This is a good one. Amanda asks, "Hello, Charlotte. You mentioned about method validation by laboratories, but how about equipment qualification and process validation? You know, this in Canada is generally not common. Some companies that pursue EU GMP certifications or other ISO certifications will incorporate that kind of process, and Health Canada is kind of loosey goosey on that, for most license holders. As long as you kind of can justify a lot of things, you don't need to do that. But do you see a lot of companies on a state level doing equipment qualification and process validation, or is that still quite rare?
So for hemp, equipment qualification would absolutely I advise everybody to do that. If you have an instrument that is measuring or doing some type of making a measurement with numbers or whatever, it's like you need to prove that that's accurate and that that works. So absolutely, equipment qualifications. Process validation, maybe not so much. I don't think it works really like making a dietary supplement where you have several different ingredients in there, or pharmaceuticals usually just have one or two maybe. So process validation, maybe not quite as necessary.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the US, it's hard to justify anything as a business owner if because it adds cost, complexity, and challenges if there's no one regulating you. But you don't see that on a state level as well. The fact that there's
But if you have people's behavior driven by the consumer who wants the certificate, then that's the hoops you have to jump through.
Right.
If you want to be certified, then you have to do those equipment quals.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Again, it's a business decision at that point.
Right.
Okay. A few more here, quick ones. Sunday here. Sunday asks, do you see any problems with using, for example, potency results conducted in an in-house lab for batch release, and perhaps not only related to in-house? And I'll give you my opinion first, since you asked, Charlotte. I don't think there's an issue generally if that testing is done right in-house. It's not very common because it's expensive. You need a whole staff and crew and facility just for that. I don't like it personally, because there's always, especially for potency, where in Canada and in the US, like it drives sales, right? The higher your flower is in potency and THC, the more desirable it is for businesses and consumers. So I generally tell people or colleagues or people that are thinking about, like, always third-party tests. Use a good lab. You take the risk off you. You have to put trust in the lab. But do you see a lot of in-house testing in the States for hemp type products or CBD or marijuana, as they're called? You know, do you see in-house, or there's a big push to use external labs?
Okay, so from my own experience, and I am an analytical chemist, so that probably changes things a little bit. When we set up business, I set up a tiny lab inside our manufacturing facility. And I am of the opinion that I don't want to ask a question unless I know what the answer is already. So I could whip out micros and potency with, pretty quickly and efficiently. So I would do kind of in-process testing along the way, along the manufacturing route, to control the process. If things needed to make adjustments, that I could do that. And then I vetted different laboratories, certified state laboratories, so that I would ensure I got the same answer as them. And because when you, and especially in the marijuana arena, once you send your product to a state certified lab, that is the number and it can't change. So like I said, I want to know the answer to the question before, I get the answer.
Right.
So that's how I ran things in our marijuana manufacturing. What I see in the hemp industry is that if they can afford it, they have it.
Mm.
So you still have to send out for a third party testing.
Still.
Okay. Yeah, pharma and dietary supplement companies, they're sort of trusted, but guess what? Nobody trusts the marijuana industry at all. So yeah, you always got to send out for third party testing. But I found it really useful to, like I said, know what the answer is before we get to the end, or to be able to correct along the way.
Great. I agree. I mean, in-house R&D process control makes sense, right? Because third-party testing has its issues. But in Canada, we've had recalls. This is a couple of years ago, but there have been companies that had to recall because of a 1 or 2% difference in THC potency on flower, not because that was, a huge difference, but because the method used to determine the original label claim was wrong or incorrect or not validated. So, that was a costly mistake by an early company that, they saved $100 on a sample, but then they had to recall, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars worth of products. So when you're starting, I always recommend people go third party, just find a good lab, because not all labs are created equal. And I'm an analytical chemist myself, so I definitely understand that. Okay, we'll end it with one more final question. This is a good one from Jimmy. I assume Jimmy works in the States. He asks, how do I convince management to give quality authority to enforce? I have shown them the codes and FDA warning letters to other companies without much luck. And this is a classic issue with any business, right? Quality is there to support production, to support the business, but also to manage risk and protect the company. And sometimes those values are aligned, and sometimes they're directly, against each other. So in someone in Jimmy's position, again, we discussed why would anyone move to this if there's no actual requirement? Like, what kind of advice would you give Jimmy?
I was raised in the South, so bless your heart, because there's nothing you can do. Companies, morals and everything, decisions flow from the top down, and there's really nothing you can do to change it. Do the best you can. And if you've already shown them FDA warning letters and other things, I mean, that's something the FDA would step in right away and get really nasty really quick, because, you have to have that authority for quality, because if you don't, and if everything's made on a business decision, you could send out contaminated product and all kinds of stuff, and it would get really ugly. Maybe, any of the bosses or owners I've ever worked for, they may not understand regulations, they may not understand quality, but they understand dollars and cents. So you might find them some examples of where the FDA has shut down businesses and ordered cease and desist. So you can't make money if they have the doors chained.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I would 100% agree with that statement that, you can't convince someone to do something out of the goodness of their own heart, or if they're not required to do it. Various companies have various risk tolerances. There's different cultures of quality. It always starts at the top and trickles down, but it's hard to argue when, maybe a competitor got charged $100,000 or something as a fine because they made a certain claim that they shouldn't have. So at the very least, companies should not be making health claims, but also they need to be focused on their quality. So Charlotte, on behalf of the C45 Quality Association, thank you so much. Thank you to EAS Consulting Group for donating their time and your time to present. We've had well over 50 participants throughout the call. Thank you to LabStat again for working with us. To our viewers, if you haven't checked out our website, please do get on our mailing list. If you're in Canada, consider joining if you are employed in the field. I just got confirmation that we are chatting with Health Canada directly in 2 weeks. So we need good people to provide good feedback. And of course, we will be having another presentation in about 3 weeks. with LabStat on cannabis vapor heavy metal testing. So whoever asked that question, I think that's right for you. So thanks again, Charlotte, and everyone stay safe out there, and good luck. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.